Hello everybody, this is SF Scala Developer Series, and we are on location in Auckland at Sungevity for a meetup with folks including Chris Richardson, and he is here with us. Hi Chris.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, good to have you with us. So Chris is going to talk about microservices and event sourcing, but Chris is known as one of the founders of CloudFoundry. And I wanted to ask you about that history and where is CloudFoundry now, and basically maybe you can give us a little background to understand kind of your trajectory in technology.
Sure. Well, I should begin by clarifying. It's actually I created the original CloudFoundry, which is different technology to the one that exists today. Mm-hmm. But you know, the history goes all the way back to, I think it was October 2006. And an Amazon evangelist came to speak at the Oakland Java Users Group. And we thought he was going to talk about APIs for buying books, because this was like part of a series of talks on, well, web services. But instead of book APIs, it was Amazon EC2. And I think SQS and S3, and it was like, wow, you can rent servers by the hour and pay 10 cents an hour. Mine was blown. So I signed up for the beta program, which I got access to 2007. And that turned into an open source project, Cloud Tools, which evolved into the original CloudFoundry, which was a Java PaaS for deploying Java applications on Amazon EC2. Mm-hmm. So pretty much it just automated how I was used to deploying apps for clients. Mm-hmm. So with just like 11 clicks of the mouse, it would upload your WAR file and spin up a bunch of EC2 instances, configure Apache as a load balancer, launch one or more Tomcat instances, and also set up MySQL with master-slave replication as well. So it's just automating what I'd done many times before.
Why 11 clicks?
Why not one click? Well, you had to make Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, basically, there were choices you had to make.
Well, one click was patented by Amazon,
yeah,
so you
that's
have to
true.
go more.
So instead of one, it was one, right?
Right. But this is great, right? This is actually, that's very interesting because it's early days. I was actually at Amazon when Amazon Web Services started, and it was not yet clear how people are going to use it. So you're actually one of the early adopters.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, you look back and it was this obscure thing, right? Mm-hmm. You know, EC2, what the heck is that?
Right.
And I don't even know if the term cloud computing existed back then. And
right.
Suddenly, whoom, and then, you know, then there was all these like cloud camps where people sat around and discussed what's the meaning of cloud computing.
Right,
and
that's right.
In the end, I just got fed up with that, and I just decided, I like AWS. I don't care what you label it, but it's useful, and, you know.
So now, you know, given this history, the microservices interest actually comes into focus, right? Because it's kind of, it's to me, it seems very logical stemming from that, but maybe you can kind of say for yourself, how did you arrive at this interest in microservices you presented at last year, Scala by the Bay?
Well, I think that there's a certain inevitability that if you build a largish, complex enough application, you're going to want to adopt a service, quote, a service-oriented lowercase architecture, right? And in other words, microservices, because a complex monolithic application is just too much of a headache. And you know, I think when I give talks, there's always people in the crowd who have to deal with large, complex, monolithic applications, and it's incredibly painful for them, right? So it's just sort of a natural evolutionary step that you want to have what's now called a microservice architecture. And I think that, and unfortunately, I'd much rather it be called a service-oriented architecture, because microservices places too much emphasis on micro and not enough on services. But the trouble with service-oriented architecture is that it just has way too much baggage associated with it, right? Yeah, like all the WS star and ESBs and all that kind of well, crap, basically.
So why are we gonna go from microservices to milliservices? Like how much weight should we put on micro, and how do we define it? Because different people mean different things by
well,
micro.
one source of inspiration for me, there was this book, The Art of Scalability, and in the book they have the scale cube, with three-dimensional model for scaling applications, and what they call y-axis scaling goes by the name of functional decomposition, which is basically just breaking up your app by function in some sort of meaningful way. And that to me is what microservices is all about, functional decomposition of your app. And you do it in order to solve problems around development and deployment and scaling, and as opposed to just doing it for the sake of having lots of small services.
So basically, I see. So micro in your sense would mean kind of logically separate or orthogonal service which can be composed with other services.
Yeah, but only break things up enough to solve problems, not just because you've got the microservice religion.
Okay. So another thing you do is Spring. And so I wonder how Spring and CloudFoundry fit together, and basically what's the relationship of all of those to the CloudFoundry which exists today with Pivotal?
Oh, well, so if you think about a microservice application, there's a lot of moving parts, whereas before, you could just take your one large WAR file, copy it onto Tomcat, and maybe multiple Tomcats, and you had a running app. Whereas now, if we've got multiple services, and each of those services need to be replicated for availability and throughput, you've got an awful lot of moving parts. And so you need some level of automation in order to make deployment sort of practical. And so one answer to that is obviously a PaaS such as CloudFoundry. Another answer actually is some of the Docker clustering technology, like Kubernetes or Marathon, or anything that sort of automates clustering of things and has built-in support for Docker. I think is kind of quite a powerful deployment option, but the key is automation.
Yes.
And then you're asking about Spring. It's funny, right? I've been using Spring for a really long time, like I guess since 2004. And what's remarkable, I mean, it's kind of weird. This is a Scala meetup where you're obligated to sort of hate Spring, right?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
You can mildly dislike it if you like.
But to me, Spring has just continued to remain incredibly relevant. And in particular, there's this technology, Spring Boot, that provides sort of a framework for building, opinionated framework that lets you very quickly get a Spring application up and running. And it's such a great fit for microservices, because you're constantly building new applications. And with Spring Boot and its convention over configuration approach, you can very quickly spin up an application that's got health checks, and a whole bunch of sort of production-ready features at that point.
Okay, that's good to know. And so about the CloudFoundry as it exists today, what is the kind of relation to the original CloudFoundry you created?
Oh, I mean, those two things, I mean, they're very, very different. In the PaaS that I built was very simple, right? It was just Java apps on EC2, whereas CloudFoundry is much more elaborate, multiple languages, many services, gigantic open source community. So the only connection effectively is the name at this point.
Okay.
Which makes my wife very excited, because she's the one who came up with the name.
No, this is a great thing, right? Like name, as programmers, we know names are important.
Yeah.
So that's
Absolutely.
certainly a great name.
So she constantly reminds me that her naming lives on.
Yes, but also I think the open source approach is similar, right? The focus on open source.
Well, part of what I did with the original CloudFoundry, the Cloud Tools provisioning layer, which was sort of a CLI-based approach to deployment, was open source, but all of the higher level stuff was not actually open source.
Okay. But I mean, definitely we, now with the open source approach, Pivotal just announced at Strata, I think, it's great to see this open source platform, right?
Yeah.
For applications.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, and I know that you recently got interested in event sourcing architectures, and I'm really curious about the connection you see between event sourcing and microservices.
Oh, yeah. So I think, so if you look at modern trends in application development, so obviously microservices is one part of it. And so what you end up with when you use microservices is a bunch of services, each one with their own independent database. And then also if you look at, another big trend in app development is NoSQL, right? And once again, you end up, where you sort of at your polyglot persistence in general, where you end up with multiple databases, most of which have very sort of limited transactional capabilities. So that you end up in both microservices and NoSQL with these distributed data management challenges of needing to have transactions that span multiple databases, yet you do not have two-phase commit, right? CAP theorem and just it's complete, it's out of fashion. And so the solution to that is an event-driven architecture where things publish events. Well, when state changes in one service, it publishes events, and subscribers can consume those events and update their own state and implement consistency. And it turns out that event sourcing is a very good way of implementing an event-driven architecture.
Yes. But we actually implemented an event sourcing architecture at Versal a couple years ago, and we actually ran into this problem that for event sourcing you do need transactions because you need serialization of events, if that's or at least within some context, right? Because if you're updating a data structure, you basically read and write to it. You need to know what is the order of reads and writes. So we actually ended up using an abstraction of an event log, which then we implemented using MySQL because we needed transactional capability. So we found that basically if you have this notion of a log, you need sequence, and you need, in this case, we need a transactional database to implement to actually ensure that we'll have the thing. So you may publish these events, but the question is how you're gonna. At some point, you will need some transactional capability to establish the order.
Yes, but one of the things I've been working on is an event store that actually takes care of some of that hard stuff.
Okay.
And so there's sort of, inside it, there's sort of a transaction management kind of capability that enables you to atomically persist events and publish them at the same time.
Okay. Well, this is great. So basically, we are actually working on a very similar problem. So
yeah.
And I'm very, very excited to see you work on this.
Cool.
So and another thing, you are the organizer of the East Bay Java user group, and I was very happy to find that you guys run events not far from where I live, as is Longevity. So this is and obviously so this is a joint event with East Bay Jog and SF Scala, and you're a long time Java user. So I wonder what aspects of Scala interest you the most? How do you see Scala community evolve, and basically where do you see Scala community going in the future?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the Oakland Java Users Group has been meeting since 2003 now, so kind of a while.
Yeah, that's.
And we're still going strong. So. So if I look back, and interestingly, the core part of the original CloudFoundry was implemented in Groovy, right? And the reason I like Groovy is that it's a very expressive language, right? You've sort of got some kind of functional capabilities where you can sort of map over collections and filter and that kind of thing. So I love the expressivity of Groovy. The expressiveness rather of Groovy. But then I got very frustrated by dynamic typing. I should have written more tests, I know that, but basically when you have to execute your code in order to find typos, that's really frustrating, right? And there were a few, especially when some of the tests even launch an EC2 instance and then fail, right?
Yes.
That's that process back then took many minutes. And so I wanted an expressive language with static typing. And so I think it was back in 2009, 2008, I discovered Scala and got very excited by it. And to this day, I still quite like Scala, though I'm somewhat frustrated by the slow compilation times and the slow ID and the quality of the IDEs.
Do you still write Java as well?
Only when I have to.
Okay.
I find it very frustrating, actually. It's sort of, I'll give you an example. So for the event sourcing stuff that I did, I actually had a Scala and Spring example, and I thought I'd open it up to a wider audience by having a Java and Spring example. And the amount of typing that required, right? Like a simple case class in Scala expands out into a whole file of Java code with getters and setters, and it's like, I hate this. It's frustrating.
Well, I mean, certainly Scala is more concise. So it's,
yes, yeah. I love the expressive of it. But then at the same time, I actually got to use a Java IDE again, and it was like, oh yeah, this is how how a really good IDE works.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, hopefully we'll see much more. We already see a lot of progress in the IDEs, and we'll see only more of it. Well, this is great stuff, Chris. So we're looking forward to your talk, and it's great to have you in the community. It's great to run these joint events, and I hope we'll run more events like this in Auckland.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thanks.